This episode of Lawyers Tell All is brought to you by the Intake Academy. Do you know how to cement relationships with more of your ideal clients, get them to commit to you, and send you more referrals than you ever thought possible? Visit www.intakeacademy.com, where you will get the strategies you need to make the most of your marketing and advertising dollars. Plus, develop a team of intake specialists and attorneys who convert more qualified case opportunities and build meaningful relationships with prospective clients. Welcome to the Lawyers Tell All podcast, where Chris Mullins, the preeminent sales and communications consultant in the legal industry, shows you how it looks through lawyers' eyes. Here, innovators in the trenches provide powerful insights that help you connect with new clients, handle the sometimes harsh realities of the legal profession, and embrace the mindsets needed to succeed. Be sure to visit our website at www.lawyerstellall.com. And while you're there, subscribe to us via your favorite network. Now, lean in, tune in, and let's take a deep dive.
Hello, everyone. It's Chris Mullins with Lawyers Tell All, and I am going to be interviewing Nancy Perpall today, and Nancy is going to introduce herself. Go ahead, Nancy.
Hey, Chris, thank you so much for inviting me. I am a retired divorce attorney. I have my own firm for 34 years. I'm focusing right now on writing. I wrote a novel, and I'm in the process of editing the final revisions for a nonfiction book, The Malnourished Marriage, 5 Essential Emotional Nutrients for Healthy Relationship. Since I spent most of my practice years taking apart marriages, I decided that I would spend my retirement trying to keep them together.
Yeah.
So my books are about relationships and how we really need to figure out what our role in the demise of a marriage, particularly, or a partnership, so that you can fix or work on what the issues are before you go into the next relationship. I've represented people in their first divorce, second divorce, third divorce.
Yeah.
And at some point, you have to have the come to Jesus meeting with them and say, look, I don't think it's all him or her. I think you really need to get some therapy. You really need to work on what this unbroken refrain about you come in, you tell me what's wrong with the marriage. And I want you to have a successful relationship. And you can't have a successful relationship if you keep doing the same thing that you've done wrong in the prior relationships. So my focus is trying to get people to realize that the real key to happy relationships is making sure that you're making the right choices when you make a decision to have a life partner.
Yeah.
That's what the fiction book around which All Things Bend is about. It's about making the right choices. And there's a lot of psychology in there. It's a fun book. It starts in Montana, ends up in Charleston, South Carolina. And it's getting very good reviews on Amazon, to my delight.
That's wonderful. That's terrific. So you went from, I'm looking at my notes here, you went from being
nursing,
critical care nurse.
I was a critical care nurse.
Yeah.
And I became a lawyer because I wrote a textbook. I was practicing in Pennsylvania, and I wrote a textbook with some colleagues from the University of Pennsylvania. And this was 1973. It was called Advanced Concepts in Clinical Nursing. Very well received. It was a textbook in many of the nursing schools throughout the country. Many hospitals adopted the protocols that we were suggesting for the various units: intensive care, emergency room, labor and delivery, etc. And the hospital that I worked at, despite my requesting them to consider adopting these protocols, I had an interview. Well, I made an appointment with the administrator, and she said, you know, I understand it's a good book, but at this hospital, doctors make the decision,
Yeah.
not a nurse. And so, what happened a few weeks later, a new hire at the hospital was a lawyer who they were bringing in because there were some substantial problems at the hospital I worked at in terms of malpractice. I mean, and that's why I was trying to get better patient outcomes. So I approached her and I said, no one's listening to me. Penn has adopted this, Hahnemann, our local hospitals, our hospital won't adopt it. And I said, what can I do? And she looked up and she said, become a lawyer, you'll have power.
Yeah, right.
So I always intended to, go back into administration, but life gets in the way and I never did go back into administration.
Yeah.
But if you want to know how I became a divorce attorney,
how did that happen?
you may appreciate that being a woman. I'm substantially older than you, but excuse me, I was hired to do defense malpractice. My first day on the job, there were 75 divorce files on my desk. And I went to the managing partner and I said, I wasn't hired to do divorce. I don't want to do divorce. I'm going through a divorce myself. And he smiled and leaned across the desk and put his finger an inch from my nose and said, you're not going to make it here. You do what we tell you to do. And you're a woman and divorce work is for women. And I'm the middle of 7 children. And when you tell me I can't do something, that's when I buckle down and prove that I can. So I did malpractice for 6 years. I had a number of trials. And then they lost the contract with the insurance company that insures the physicians. But I had the stable of clients who I had done divorces for, and I had some that were pending. So I left, of course, with everybody's approval and opened my own firm and did exceptionally well. So I never went back into medicine, unfortunately, but sometimes, life gets in the way.
Yeah, but that attorney that pointed at you like that, I mean, some great things came out of it. You turned it around, right?
Well, if you want to hear the postscript.
Yeah.
Almost, I would have to say he had 2 sons. And almost, I'd have to say 20 years later, the wife of his youngest son comes into my office to get a divorce.
Yikes.
And lo and behold, this very brilliant attorney didn't cross all his I's and dot all his T's. And I ended up getting a substantial amount of money because the building that he bought for his son to have the insurance company in was not in a prenuptial agreement. They had put it in joint names. I mean, it was a fiasco because he hired some people from Philadelphia. The long and the short of it is I got even.
I was gonna say, you probably got even, right?
I got even.
Yeah. And so I can imagine that when you're kind of like the way you said at the beginning, you were helping people take things apart, so to speak, but now you turned around and you want to put them together. I can imagine that had to be over and over and over again, people, wanting to split up and having to deal with that. I mean, it has to be traumatizing even for you.
Well, I have to say, I'm not sure if I hadn't been a nurse that I would have actually stayed in it. I mean, in divorce work. But I felt such a sense of satisfaction when I helped people. And I don't want to blow my own horn, but because I was a nurse, I looked at it more holistically than just, this is somebody sitting in front of me who wants a divorce and I can charge them X number of dollars and make a fortune on this case. But I also, if I thought that they needed, a medical exam, I'd say, I really think you need to get something checked out. I always recommended therapy. I think therapy is really essential if you're going through a divorce, to try to find out what part you played in the demise of the marriage, so that you can take stock and inventory of things that you may not want to do in a subsequent relationship to avoid getting a second or third divorce. You may know this, the statistics are, for a first divorce, it is like 47, 48%. Second divorce is 60%, and third divorce is 70%.
Yeah.
Those are the statistics. They're real. The research is good. The American matrimonial attorneys have recently done another survey. And the reality is that if you don't learn what it is you've done to provoke the situation, you're just going to end up doing the same behavior over and over again.
Did you find a lot of clients listen to you when you tried to share with them, you know, the idea of therapy? Maybe even, I would imagine you probably did that even before they went through the divorce, you know, like, just think about it. Try therapy before you come to me again. So did they listen?
I would say probably 50-50. You know, there was some, obviously, as I already said, you know, having come from a medical background, we have to have psychiatric nursing. There were some clients who came to me who clearly were bipolar and they were not on medication. And those clients, I would say, if you want to see your children, if you want to have a good result, you know, your spouse is blaming you for X, Y, and Z, which has a factual basis on it. And if we don't appear in front of the judge and say you're getting help and you're addressing your issues, it's going to be an issue for you. And when you actually approach it in that way and explain that if you want a good result in this case, you have to show them that you are trying.
Yeah.
And this really did work with alcoholism. I think substance abuse is a big factor in the demise of marriages. And I've represented a lot of alcoholics. I was fortunate to represent higher asset cases, lawyers, doctors, presidents of banks, presidents of corporations, people who had their own business. You know, when you're under so much stress and you're self-medicating, and trust me, I like a glass of wine like anyone else. But sometimes, you know, when you're under so much pressure, you're not realizing the extent to which the alcohol is influencing your judgment.
Yeah.
So I would bring that to their attention and say, you know, these allegations are true. You know, you had a DUI. You had the kids in the car when you got the DUI. You want to see your kids. We're going to have to go in there and say, Your Honor, my client acknowledges he or she is an alcoholic. They're willing to go to rehab. They're willing to, you know, go to family counseling or individual counseling with the children and herself or himself. And the judges really do like that. If you're trying to help them make a decision, I don't think any judge wants to terminate a parent's rights to see children. Obviously, unless there's sexual or other abuse.
Right.
And I've had that in my practice where there was sexual abuse of a little girl. And that was extremely hard to prove.
Yeah, it had to be just difficult, the whole process, the whole case. I mean, you know,
Those are really,
too.
Those are heart-wrenching cases.
When you're talking to clients and they're telling you their story and they're telling you they're getting to all the details, how difficult is it, or do you even bother to try to control those conversations on some level so you can kind of get to the heart of the matter? Do you, and if you do, how do you do that?
Well, you ask an excellent question, because we all get paid by the hour, by the minute. And if somebody is really veering off of what's really important, particularly I find when someone comes in and wants to convince me that their spouse is crazy or a narcissist or the worst person, the worst homo sapien that ever walked erect on the earth. I mean, you can't let them go on and on, because I'm not a therapist.
Mm-hmm.
I have a psychiatric nursing background, but I'm not a clinical
Yeah.
therapist.
Mm-hmm.
And I have to veer them back and say, I understand. I know exactly what you're talking about. However, we just spent 5 minutes with you talking about something that's not going to be relevant to the court.
Mm-hmm.
They don't want you to crucify your spouse. I'm telling you, that is a no starter for most judges.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And yeah, you always bring the conversation back. And I think the way you bring it back is asking reflexive questions. My spouse is a narcissist. And the reflexive question would be, and to what extent did that impact
Mm-hmm.
financials? You gave me your financials. Being a narcissist impacted it how? And
Right.
that type of thing.
Yeah.
You have to always bring it back to the facts of the case.
And they probably, a lot of them probably hadn't had any therapy.
Exactly.
So now you're the therapist. I mean,
Right.
they don't mean it to be that way, but the conversation goes that way.
Exactly.
And, it has to be like really, really, I mean, relationships are hard. And I've always said relationships, they are work. All relationships, roll up your sleeves, they are work.
They are work. They're a great deal of work. And, Benjamin Franklin said, keep your eyes wide open before marriage and half shut after it. And there's a lot of wisdom to that.
Yeah.
Rummy said, when I was clever, I wanted to change the world. And now that I'm wise, I want to change myself.
Yeah.
And the reality is that you can never change another person,
Mm-hmm.
ever.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
They're coming with their own DNA, they're coming with their own background, their own culture, their own beliefs, their own biases, and trying to fight with somebody and convince them that they're the ones who needs to change it never works.
Mm-hmm.
So in a relationship, you've got to find some common ground. Men, as we know, are not as verbal as women. Men on an average day speak 7,000 words. Women speak 22,000 words. Well, but that goes back to, evolution.
Yeah.
Women, had a baby and were talking to the baby, and then they're sitting around the campfire facing other women and talking to other women, while the men are sitting in a bush looking straight ahead, being quiet.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Waiting for the woolly mammoth to show up.
Yeah.
But evolutionarily, their brain doesn't even, the area of the brain that is the Broca center, which is responsible for, our verbal ability, isn't as developed.
Yeah.
Which was a problem for Einstein, by the way. In any event, no, I actually did like, I did like practicing family law. It just, in the end, got so contentious.
Yeah.
I don't know what happened. Our society started changing.
Mm-hmm.
People's expectations started changing. People were disrespectful, not necessarily to me because they needed me.
Mm-hmm.
But they would be disrespectful to opposing counsel, disrespectful to their ex-spouse or soon to be ex-spouse. The whole culture of our culture.
Yeah, it got messy. What about the idea of having it would be great. There probably is some kind of boot camp or something like that for people to go to before you get married. Before you get married, you've got to go to it, right?
Well, interestingly, you raise another good point. In June of last year, Brides Magazine, of all magazines, had a big article about how premarital counseling is almost a must in today's society, because the millennials and the young people who are getting married, albeit they're getting married older. The average age for women is 28. The average age for men is between 30, 32, 34.
Mm-hmm.
And they're coming to the marriage, by and large, with significant debt due to school debt, due to credit card debt, car debt, and that needs to be disclosed. I mean, you need to go to premarital counseling to discuss, let's put if you don't want to sign a prenup, that's fine, but let's go through the motions of what it is we're going to disclose with each other. You know, do you want children? You don't want to find out after you're married that they really were, their heart was not into it. You really need to explore that. That's a real big issue. The other one is finances. And now we talk about financial infidelity, not that adultery.
Tell me about that.
Financial infidelity is when you fail to disclose to your spouse, because financial infidelity has to be after you're married. But if you fail to disclose with your spouse that you've taken out a loan, or you've taken money out of one account that was joint, or even if it wasn't joint, it was commingled in some way so that there would be a marital interest of the other spouse in it, and you use it for something that the spouse is not consented to, then you have a big blow up over whatever, or the spouse finds out about this. You get a divorce and you bring a cause of action based upon financial infidelity. And it's a very well recognized issue today. And if you go into a marriage with substantial, I think the statistics is about $30,000. You know, the average kids who are getting married today come with about $30,000 of debt. You need to disclose that. And the issue is, how are we going to pay this?
Right.
Are we going to pay it with marital assets? And then in 10 years, and 3 kids, you're fed up with me? And I've reduced your debt. Am I going to get compensated for that? A lot of courts won't compensate you. They won't.
I think it would be important too to talk about that, because some people could get married strategically, right?
A lot of people get married.
Like, let me go find a partner and we'll take care of this.
A lot of people get married strategically, and a lot of people who have waited for a while, like 30, 32, settle. And that's a reality. And there's nothing wrong with settling. But if you want children, if you want a traditional marriage, albeit there are no traditional marriages anymore. But in any event, you're not being honest with the person that you're marrying, because in your head, you're settling and think, if it doesn't work out, I can always get divorced. And the person that you're marrying may not be on that same wavelength or have that belief. So you really need to put all your cards on the table. I've done a lot of premarital counseling in terms of, preparing I did a lot of prenuptial agreements the last 10 years that I was in practice. And there were only 2 times that the fiance would not sign the agreement. And in both instances, my client did not go through with the wedding. But, a prenuptial agreement does not cause divorce. There was a myth 30 years ago that if you had a prenuptial agreement, or if you had been asked for it, you're thinking about getting divorced before you get married. No, today, millennials are asking for prenuptial agreements because they want that disclosure. And they may, I'm 75 years old, and I am, I have assets that I'm going to be leaving to my kids. But let me tell you, my children, both of them who are professional, one is a law professor, the other is a vice president of a large corporation. They're not going to have the assets to leave to the next generation. Our generation is, the baby boomers are the last generation where there's going to be an enormous shift of wealth in this country. And if you're expecting an inheritance, you really need to talk to your spouse that you're going to get married to and discuss, if I have an inheritance, I intend to keep this aside for my retirement, because we all know we all know what's going to go on with Social Security. We may not even have Social Security checks after June, God forbid. But the reality is, kids are going to have to really start to think about retirement and starting to save. It's just, it's a necessity to discuss what your aims
Mhm.
are, what your goals are, what your expectations are before you get married.
And just discussing it, you probably learn a lot more about each other that you didn't know when you didn't bring it up, when you were
And
dating.
And if you're in that kind of an intimate relationship, you know if the other person is lying
Yeah.
or if the other person is uncomfortable with that discussion.
Mhm.
And if they are uncomfortable, I highly recommend going to a therapist who does premarital counseling. There are many therapists, many excellent therapists. You can Google premarital counseling, and there was a review of the 7 best online premarital counseling
Mhm.
courses. So,
Mhm.
I mean, it's available and it's certainly worth the money.
Yeah.
But you know, I worry about the younger people who are getting married today, because it's really the Disneyfication of what a marriage is supposed to be.
Yeah.
Instagram, Facebook,
Mhm.
all of this, and they
Mhm.
want it now.
Mhm.
They don't want to work for it. They
Yeah.
either want to inherit it, they want to win it in the lotto, or, you know, they want it now.
It's not like when my grandparents were married. It's
Well,
it's it's very it's very, very different. And I think one of the biggest things that I find in my business, working with attorneys and even, other team members at law firms, is empathy. Empathy is just, it's missing, it's not there, and it's in all relationships, and it's the most difficult thing to teach.
I'm not sure you can teach empathy. I think
Hmm.
empathy is learned at mama's breast, or when she holds you with a bottle,
Yeah.
and when you fall down, and if you're comforted,
Hmm.
if both of your parents comfort you. We come out of our childhood with preformed behaviors
Hmm.
that we go into relationships with. And if we come from a situation where our parents were fighting, you had to hide in the bedroom until, all the screaming was over
Hmm.
and the plates stopped flying against the wall. That's not teaching a child
Hmm.
how to constructively resolve a conflict.
Yeah.
So what makes you think you're going to be able to constructively, resolve a conflict? And that's
Hmm.
what I'm talking about in terms of premarital counseling. You can be taught how to constructively resolve a conflict.
Hmm.
You can either decide that you want to win the argument, or you're going to want to lose your spouse to the argument.
Hmm.
And you need to back off and to see if there's some middle ground. There's always some middle ground.
Right.
And let's face it, there's always going to be 1 or 2 issues in every single relationship that's never resolved.
Yeah. Hmm.
Ever resolved.
Right. Right.
I mean, it's just human nature. It's the
It
way.
would be great, if they talked about this in high school and really talked about it, make it be, a serious class, and then, in any other class that you have in the future after that in school and, like, you have to take it.
Well, from your lips to God's ears. I mean, I live in Florida, and you can't even say gay, and
Hmm.
they're banning books right and left.
Hmm.
I mean, you wouldn't even believe the books they're banning.
Yeah.
So I doubt that they would really let a lawyer or a psychologist in a school and discuss things like, how frequently. It's called the 3 F's of sex when you're discussing, with your intended. It's, frequency, fantasy, and how you feel about it.
Hmm.
You can't talk about that, certainly.
Yeah. Yeah.
Not in this state.
No, you can't anywhere, I don't think. Yeah. Yeah.
But I mean, it's so many divorces, so many children would avoid the tragedy of having to grow up in a broken home. And I hate to say broken home because that's not politically correct anymore.
Hmm.
In a divorce, coming from a divorce situation. I know that we can change things,
Hmm.
but as I said, when I was clever, I thought I could change the world. And now that I'm wise and I'm changing myself. So my expectations are very low, but I think that I could make an impact. But I know that I have a website. It's nancyperpall.com. I write blogs about relationships, about being a new parent, about now it's finally being recognized that new fathers go through postpartum depression.
Yeah.
Finally, you know, as a nurse, I saw that, and that was 50 years ago. Anyway, you know, there's so much information available to people, but there's still the human component. And I have never heard a father recently tell his daughter she was anything but a princess. And guess what? You know, the world is not going to revolve around her. And I shudder when I see these Instagram clips, albeit these children are absolutely adorable, but they're telling their parents off.
Yeah, I know.
2-year-olds.
Yeah.
Not wanting to go to bed. I'm not going to go to bed. And they think it's funny. The parents are laughing and they take Instagram. That's going to come home to bite you.
Or TikTok. You see it on TikTok. I think.
Oh, the TikTok.
That's crazy. That's crazy. Tell me, so I'm before I ask you about your book, I'm willing to bet, well, I suppose I could be wrong, that most of the professionals that come to see you are the doctors and the lawyers and, you know, the high profile kind of careers.
Well, when I first started practicing, obviously, you know, I had to get through 75 files, which were not all but yes, I did a lot of, I became known as a high asset lawyer. I went to all the national conferences. You know, I went to, when quadros first came out, I was really the only one in a couple of counties who understood what a quadro was, which is I'm sure you're aware, you know, you file that to a retirement, a pension, and or a 401k. But I mean, now everybody can do it and there are templates for it. But, you know, if you really want to learn the subject, you really have to go to the cutting edge conferences. You have to really put the time in to learn. You know, as a nurse, I was always, you know, we have to take courses, you have to read the journals, you have to keep up on everything because everything was changing so rapidly. But it is as well in the law now. I mean, lawyers are pretty much specialized. You know, in Pennsylvania, you're not allowed to say, I think they've changed that actually recently. You specialize in family law, you specialize in divorce or custody or whatever. But we really are specialists. People do real estate, or they do estates, or they do personal injury, environmental litigation. I mean, you know, structural litigation. There's so much to learn. And I will say that the first $1 million case that came in, probably I was in practice for 2 or 3 years. And it was a physician that I had worked with in intensive care. And he had over $1 million. And this was 30 years ago. And my heart was going, oh my gosh, you know, oh my gosh, $1 million case. My last 2 years of practice, I had $100 million case, and I wasn't even going patter, pitter, patter. Give me something I can get excited about. You know, when there's so much money, you know, you really can. It's a much easier case. You know, I mean, especially if, well, in any event, you hire your forensic accountants. You sit everybody in a room. You know, but no, I was very fortunate, and then I did the higher asset cases.
Well, you worked for it, and right now you're trying to help everybody, and with your books. So just tell me a little bit about your book.
Well, around which all things bend, of course, is love, because that's what everybody's looking for. Even if they say they're not, everybody wants to be accepted. They want to feel special. They want to feel as if they're the most important person to someone, not necessarily your mother or father.
Right.
But Around Which All Things Bend is the novel, and it's about relationships. And it's about a young man who comes, he's going to inherit a huge ranch in Montana. He comes back from Afghanistan because his name was Whitgate, that was the last, they all serve. You serve your country, you come back, you get married, you have kids.
Right.
So he does come home, he gets engaged, but he realizes this is not right. This girl is not right for me. This isn't going to work. And he breaks the engagement, but of course it's a small town, it's 4 days before the wedding. And some of his army buddies who have come for the wedding, but of course there's no wedding, so they drink and they talk about their experience in Afghanistan. One of them talks him into coming to Charleston, South Carolina, to help him out with something. And he goes to South Carolina and he meets the love of his life. And it's a romance relationship, but they come together in a very healthy way. And it's just trying to show people the difference between an unhealthy way and a healthy way.
Yeah.
And then
putting the brakes on. Yeah.
Well, thank you. The book that I'm going to be publishing probably, I hope next fall, hope it gets out next fall, is called The Malnourished Marriage. And I use the metaphor of food, which everyone understands.
Yeah.
And I'll just give you a short, communication is water. You can't live more than 3 days without water. And no marriage or relationship can survive without communication. And by the way, communication doesn't necessarily have to be verbal communication.
Right. Yeah.
You can touch someone, you can rub their arm, you can hug them, you can kiss them on the forehead. You get that same dopamine in your system as you would if you were having the most intimate conversation you've ever had at a French restaurant, a Parisian restaurant in Paris. And that's what I talk about. People have a lot of misconceptions about communication. And I've really studied that subject. I've studied relationships. I've been to lots of seminars. And by the way, my husband's a psychologist.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
A good teacher.
Yeah, he's an excellent teacher. But in any event, I think people, if they really step back and they understand, divorce comes from the Latin word daptere. It means to divert. That's what divorce means at the root of the word. And that's what divorce is. Divorce is a diversion. You're diverting from something that you've committed to. And unless you really understand what went wrong, you're going to make the same mistakes. You're going to bring the same techniques into your next relationship. And I've seen it happen over and over again. And I think that's the thing I'm struggling to try to educate people.
Yeah, and the same techniques and mistakes that are made in your relationship, your partnership, it's also happening in your business relationships, and it's also happening with your friends and your work relationships.
Your children.
Yeah. Same thing. Wonderful, wonderful. Tell everybody again how they can get your book, get in touch.
Well, my book is on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, anywhere books are sold, they could order it. And it's Around Which All Things Bend. It is on Amazon. If you want to look at the reviews, I'm very proud of them. I have to say, honestly, I'm shocked because I didn't think the book was that good, but other people think it is.
Right.
But I don't like anything I write. However, a lot of other people do. My website, if you're interested in some practical anecdotal advice that I've learned, not only in my own marriages, but representing people in divorce. It's Nancy Perpall, spelled PERPALL.com. And there's a lot of blogs. I've gotten a lot of feedback, which is why I'm writing the malnourished marriage, from people I have a series of blogs about the malnourished marriage, which I've gotten really good feedback on. So
It's a good testing ground too, those blogs.
it's an excellent testing ground. It is really a very good testing ground.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much. It's been wonderful. It's been great. And I wish you the best.
Well, thank you. And thank you so much for having me. I really enjoyed speaking to you. And I hope your audience learned something from it.
They definitely will. They definitely will. Okay. Well, so long, everybody. Chris Mullins with Lawyers Tell All. Bye-bye, everybody. So long. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you for tuning in to Lawyers Tell All, where Chris Mullins takes you on a journey with lawyers in the trenches who show you the realities of what it takes to succeed in this chaotic, crowded, ever-changing profession. Remember to visit our website at www.lawyerstellall.com and enjoy even more great episodes like this one. Again, while you're here, subscribe to us via your favorite network. We look forward to seeing you next time on Lawyers Tell All.